who made a small fortune on doing chat boxes on the whatever they called their thing they had before the internet here. They had a nice chat system. And he invested it. He was the first ISP in France back around 1994. And in 2001 and said, everybody's being ripped off by their broadband provider. I'm going to do better. And he went to work. He introduced a 30-euro triple play the next year. He is now personally worth about $6 billion. Has proved that you can sell complete triple play for $40 a month and make a generous profit, and has now jumped into wireless and is transforming wireless.
Generous indeed at $6 billion net worth, I'd say so. So is the France Telecom, is that a government-owned monopoly? How does that work?
The government has a big piece of it, 30% or something, I don't remember. The rest is on the stock market, but the government chooses who's the boss. Mm-hmm. It's usually an ex-politician. Stéphane Richard is it now. And they've been fighting back against Xavier since he took off. And everybody across Europe has been copying him and showing how you can deliver a heck of a lot more for half the price that the incumbents worth. The incumbents are really scrambling to keep up.
Does this new guy have a technology edge, or is it just his business acumen?
He dropped out, never went to college, started doing the chat lines online. I wish I remembered the name of the SIM service, and learned the technology. Mm-hmm. And what he did in 2001, he designed a network that was all IP, all simple to run, everything running on open source software, a fair amount of which his people have actually written, and much more efficient than any incumbent phone company anywhere in the world. Yeah. And I visited several dozen along the way.
Yeah, all IP 15 years ago, that was revolutionary.
Well, AT&T right now is starting to make that change, and they're saying the government has to give them concessions in order to allow them to do it. Mm-hmm. Xavier did that 2001. Mm. He's now doing something at least as revolutionary on the wireless, where he got the license about 3 years ago and has already taken millions of customers, mm-hmm. scaring France Telecom even harder.
Mm-hmm. Listen, Dave, while we're talking about wireless, I had a question for you. I don't know how much time you have, but John Malone, who is one of the big-time players that's behind the announced merger of Charter and Time Warner. As our listeners know, the purchase of Time Warner by Comcast fell through. Well, another company, Charter, has stepped up. The guy behind it, John Malone, just yesterday or today, said that one of the big synergies that he sees is Wi-Fi calling, where he collaborates with the other big cable operators, including Comcast, Cox, and others, to have a seamless Wi-Fi calling system with a default rollover to a potential Verizon. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Well, it works. Mm-hmm. And the reason I know it works is that was what I was going to describe that Xavier is doing to wireless. Mm-hmm. And anywhere I walk in Paris, I turn on my Wi-Fi. There are 4 main carriers. Sorry about that. This microphone's not staying in place very well.
Well, you told it who's boss.
It's an Apple headset off Jenny's iPod. And it's
well, you
very
sound
convenient.
A lot better now.
Yeah. Keeps falling out of my ear. You walk around Paris, and we did this 5 years ago, and just like, in fact, why don't I ask you that? Lena, if you turn on your Wi-Fi mm-hmm. on a cell phone or your computer, how many of your neighbors' Wi-Fi do you see?
Oh, probably Around 20 to 50, depending on where I'm standing in my apartment.
And what about you, Stu?
Not quite as many. I'm in a private home, so it's not quite as dense, but I'd say at least 10 to 15.
Now, all those Wi-Fis have enormous spare capacity 95% of the time. Most of the time, you're not using all your broadband connection. You're just surfing the net. You're not using very much bandwidth.
Right.
So what we do is you turn on all those Wi-Fis and let everybody passing by use them to check in on the Internet, make their phone calls, and do that on a second SSID with proper security and authentication. And suddenly, to heck with those expensive cell phone towers and those $80 a month cell phone plans. How much do you think Zave is charging for 4 gigabytes a month, unlimited phone calls to France, the United States, and 20 other countries, unlimited SMS, and after you get to the 4 gigabytes, you don't get cut off, you just go a little bit slower. What do you think, what would the price on that be in the United States? Linda, do you have a wireless plan?
Yeah, but I only go up to a gig of data and it's prepaid, so I'm lower than 40 a month.
Okay.
And it's all I can talk, but there's no long distance. I mean, there's no out-of-country long distance included. But I feel pretty good about my deal, and that's just a gig. So if that's around $40. But this sounds similar to the company Republic Wireless. Which,
well, it's the other way around. They're doing it here first. That's why I know it works.
Makes sense.
What's the incentive for the individual user that shares his bandwidth? What's his incentive to join the network?
If he joins the network, when he is out of home, he gets to use everybody else who shares. So it's completely opt-in, but almost everybody opts in because they want to be able to use it when they're walking around Paris.
When you opt in, is in there no cost or reduced cost, or you still pay the standard rate?
You pay nothing whatsoever.
Okay. That's incentive.
Yep.
Yep.
I'd do it.
Yep. And how much, Stu, do you have a wireless plan?
Yes, I do. I pay $40 a month. Unlimited, well, quote unquote unlimited data. I haven't hit the ceiling. Pardon me. I'm not sure what my ceiling is. Unlimited domestic calls, and like Lena, I don't have international, but it's $40 a month flat fee.
And those are great prices.
Yeah, we've both done very well.
Yeah, I mean that's down. That's down from just a couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where I was paying about $150 a month to AT&T. It was crazy.
2 years ago, I was definitely paying around $80 or $90 a month for a smartphone on Sprint.
Yeah.
Now I'm doing Sprint prepaid, and I'm paying half and using about the same.
I have not yet figured out why prepaid gets such a bad rap, when in fact it's the way to go, if you ask me.
Well, I think it gets a bad rap because it's not as profitable for the company.
Yes, there you go. There you go. Go ahead, Dave.
I can give it all, but let me give you one last piece there. Zave's 4 gigabyte with everything thrown in is $23 a month.
Wow.
It sounds delightful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's possible because the Wi-Fi calling limit takes 3/4 of the traffic away from the towers. It doesn't cost anything because he already has the DSL and fiber network going into enough homes for all the Wi-Fi. And that's why the folks at AT&T and Verizon are really scared, because the technology works and the cable companies know it, and they're thinking of coming in. So that's what Darth Vader was talking about.
Yeah, Darth Vader. For those of you who don't know, that's the AKA for John Malone, one of the cable mavens from going back 30 years or so in the industry, behind the scenes deal maker.
Very, very smart guy.
Yes, he is. Brilliant, I would say.
Yeah, he was actually at Bell Labs, and he looked around, and he said, the researchers live very well at Bell Labs and have lots of opportunities, and it's great fun, but the president of the company makes more money, so I'm going to go into business. And he too is a billionaire. He's a very tough businessman, which is why he's called Darth Vader. But he's smart, confident. And the service at Charter, and if he takes over Time Warner, is no better or worse than the other cable companies. A friend of mine is a CTO, is one of the best engineers in the business. He takes over Time Warner. It's going to be a little bit better than Time Warner is today. Not a lot, because Time Warner is not that bad anymore. They're getting their act together.
A couple of comments that he made that he's going to do if and when he takes over is convert all Time Warner channels to digital. And he's saying the benefit of that is going to free up some bandwidth for faster broadband for consumers. So that's one of the perks. There's a lot of spend going on, as you know, Dave, prior to regulatory approval of these purchases about all the good things that are going to happen once the merger gets approved. So, hold your breath.
Yeah, they're exactly the same thing Time Warner was going to do anyway, maybe a year later. I've got 50 down and 5 up, rock solid on my Time Warner now. They were actually ahead of Comcast and Charter, bringing that speed up. So they always were a low investment, a little bit behind everybody. But they're catching up fine. Remember, the engineers who run all these companies are good friends. The cable companies don't compete with each other, so they're happy to exchange ideas.
Sure.
They're using the same equipment from the same vendors. They talk to the same analysts. They read the same textbooks. They all know the right way to do this kind of thing.
Right. Would you say the same thing across the industries, telephone and cable, that they are the same bedfellows?
They have, no, it's not. In the telephone business, fell out of my ear again. Tell me if my microphone fades when something like that happens. In the cable business, nobody competes with anybody.
Right.
In the phone business, AT&T and Verizon compete with each other hard on the wireless side. So they all know each other, and they're personally polite, and they all know all the same things. But they don't talk about things in public. So you go to the big phone conferences, and the technical people there keep their mouths shut. You go to the cable conferences, you have 3 companies sitting on a panel exchanging ideas with each other because they're not afraid any of them are going to compete.
Right.
So the flavor of the cable conferences are great because everybody's friends. Nobody competes. The companies are all getting very, very rich. And they pulled into DOCSIS way before the telcos got up to that, except for Verizon Fios.
Just a quick clarification for our listeners out there who are probably very familiar with this, but cable companies have a given territory. For instance, Time Warner has Manhattan, Staten Island, and parts of Brooklyn, whereas Cablevision has the rest of New York City. The lines never cross, and it's that way throughout the entire United States, with the exception of 1 or 2 what they call overbuilders, like RCN, that come in and supply cable in competition with one of these incumbents. But basically, throughout the whole nation, everyone has their own territory, and as Dave just said, they do not compete with each other. Phone companies, particularly wireless, they sell services nationwide and, of course, compete with each other. Their territories overlap.
Yeah. One of the funny things is that you read the press, especially the tech press, and they say, this company, Comcast has this great thing, they're way ahead, Time Warner is way behind. A reporter I really respect wrote me saying he thinks Time Warner is going to be in real trouble because they're behind. They all have some of the best engineers in the world. They have huge teams, hundreds, thousands of engineers who know everything about the technology. In fact, often they're the folks who designed the technology. They all have Comcast, Charter, Time Warner, even RCN, have access to the same tools, all understand what's going on in the technology, and it's a matter of partly competence on the part of the company and partly how much they want to invest. It's not a matter that T-Mobile is much smarter than Sprint, especially if your Sprint is going to be much smarter than T-Mobile in a year. Lena?
Yeah.
You want to move to Paris and get a good connection?
I like the idea. I've got to say, it's a nice one. I'd have to up my game on my Duolingo app and start doing French though. I mean I hear a lot of people speak English there, but it's more polite if you do that language. Have you run into the app Duolingo?
Haven't tried that one.
It's fantastic. It's made by the same guy who made the reCAPTCHA technology, where they did book scanning. So when you did a CAPTCHA, to prove you're not a robot, instead you ended up help translating books where the OCR didn't work, like getting the letters into digital format. But it's wonderful. It's free for you because once you get to the higher levels of a language, you're actually helping to crowd translate an article for BuzzFeed or CNN. But seeing as for you it's language practice, and you're not doing it at the lower levels, it's a great app and it's free. But I really like knowing when something is free, why is it free? And in this, why it's free. You're not going to get ads, you're not going to get whatever. It's just free because you are helping in crowd translation. And it's a good app. They just did an upgrade, and I'm practicing my German because this summer I'm going to a hacker conference outside of Berlin.
How does the app work in actual practicality?
It feels a bit like a game. It has a mic, and it will give you the written phrase, and then you say it. It scores you, and it will have it in German, and then you need to give the English translation, or it'll have the English, and you need to give the German translation. And it just goes kind of little tidbit by little tidbit. So I'm doing about 20 minutes a day right now.
So it's like interactive teaching.
Yeah, and if you get something wrong over and over again, you can keep trying, but eventually you may give up.
Wow,
but that's
amazing,
because
Lena.
of where you're at. Yeah, it's a free app, and I've really enjoyed it. So I'd have to get the French one if I was wanting the broadband there.
Tell us the name of the app again.
Duolingo.
That's Duolingo.
Yeah, Duolingo.
Wow.
It's,
okay.
I highly recommend it. So if you're wanting to get when you're doing immersion as you are right now, it's a fine idea to also do a little practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. America's taking over the world, though. Another thing I see on all the signs around Paris are learn English, the key to success.
Really?
And, yeah.
Wow.
And most of the people under 40 have functional English. Everybody in business does. That's true all across Northern Europe because the American business is so powerful. And that's the way a German talks to a Russian when they don't know each other's language.
In English.
Both of them usually speak English.
Wow.
I am a very silly person in that I am bummed Esperanto never worked out. Duolingo is supposed to get Esperanto soon, but I don't think that'll make anyone learn it.
Well, it's good to have some friends who tilt at windmills. I've often been accused of that.
So yes, I am definitely jealous of that amount of bandwidth at that price. I would love that.
And that's because they have 4 competitors, whereas in the U.S., because they have strong regulators who insisted, and in the U.S. we only have cable versus telco.
So when it comes to that kind of bandwidth, that means that they're way more prepared for this next stage of internet, the whole Internet of Things.
The Internet of Things is such a buzzword that everybody says they're part of the Internet of Things. I suspect somebody who makes iPod headphones will say they're ideal for listening to your air conditioner to see whether it's running, or more practically, ideal for listening to your baby monitor when you're not home.
Well,
so everybody wants in on the Internet of Things. It means so many different things to different people. I wasn't sure where you were going to take it. So you wanted to talk about that.
Well, I had a question just in follow-up to Lena's question. I've read that there are going to be so many billions of addresses required once the Internet of Things takes off, that everything is going to have to transform from the, I believe it's IPv4 to IPv6. Can you tell us what that means, Dave? I've read that, but I'm not sure I understand exactly what that means, from one IP platform to another IP platform with more capacity.
Okay, for the practical stuff for our users, it makes no difference at all.
I mean, my favorite thing I've heard said about it is that IPv4 is the size of a golf ball, while IPv6 is the size of the sun. in terms
Wow.
of the number of connections. That's my favorite because it's easy, it's accessible.
Is that true? I mean, that's
Yeah,
a heck of an
there's
exponential leap.
I mean, there's a lot more connections.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stories about it. It doesn't affect users because there are a lot of ways to use the IPv4 and stretch it, which is what's happening right now. When you're on Comcast, they may not have enough IPv4 numbers, but they do what's called network address translation, and it works well enough for practical purposes.
For our listeners out there, I just want to say that everything on the internet that runs on the internet has a unique address, which is a series of numbers called an IP address. And the IP4, which is the current platform that we have, I think is limited to something like about 4.3 billion, Dave, if I'm not mistaken. Numbers.
You understand why that happened. IT was developed by Bob Kahn, Vint Cerf, and a lot of friends in 1973, 1976 to hook up a few university computers. Government money, because they wanted to survive the atomic bomb and so on, paid for it all. But they figured that, well, yeah, one day we might have 10,000 computers on it. Who knows? One day we might have 1 million computers on it. And they really did design it, even when they were hooking up the first 3 computers, so that it can grow, that our whole internet is basically running on the same thing that Bob and Vint developed 40 years ago, and it's still working. But so they put an impossibly large number there, 4 billion computers, that they would have enough address space. And the world has changed, as we know, and 4 billion is running out. And what they have to do is they have to make the address a little bit longer, so you can have more addresses, because a longer number gives you more addresses. And people have been very slow to change, because they've come up with a lot of ways to share what you have in the old address space. So they're living with it perfectly well. About 10 or 15% of the internet has moved over. Comcast happens to be a pioneer in that. Comcast happens to be one of the best technical outfits in telephone or cable. They are ahead of everybody else, but only a little bit.
So the IP stands for simply Internet Protocol, and IPv4 had the 4 billion internet address. IPv6 is supposed to have more like 340 trillion internet addresses. So it really is, golf ball to sun.
How many more digits
because
is
they
that?
made the big mistake the first time. So this time they came up with something so big that they can't imagine it running out for 1,000 years, even when we have interstellar travel.
Okay, for our listeners out there, we have kind of segued into our feature topic for this evening, and that is the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things. Lena, do you have a good working definition of what that means, what it is?
When things that aren't people and aren't computers start being online. So when your refrigerator is online, when your thermostat is online, when your shoes are online, that is when your stuff is just going online. That's the Internet of Things. It's not people, it's not computers.
Why would we do that? Why are we moving in that direction?
Well, for a thermostat, people like the idea of being able to monitor so they can say, well, it's really, really hot outside, but I don't want to air condition it all day, but I want to come home to a cool house. So they set it up so it starts running when they get home or right before they walk in the door. So they're doing that remotely. They're doing it online. I don't know if it's a great idea. There's a lot of security concerns around it, but I have heard of people who have that set up already who can monitor when they're on vacation if their pet sitter is actually showing up or not. Because if their pet sitter is coming in, they're probably going to change the thermostat in the summer. Thermostat doesn't change. They don't know if their pet sitter's there, and they can check up on them.
So basically, the Internet of Things allows us to monitor situations, allows us to turn things on and off remotely, right?
Or perhaps if your shoes are part of the Internet of Things, they've already done this with some. There's been some studies done where they've tried to put a little thing in the front of a shoe that'll kind of detect and give you silent GPS in your shoes. So like it'll vibrate at the edge when you need to turn left. It'll just vibrate in the left shoe. It'll just vibrate in the right shoe. And it's an interesting use. I have something called a Fitbit, where instead of it being on the internet, it's connected to my phone through the internet, and it's a pedometer. So I challenge my friends to walk more than me. A few of them do, but most of them don't. And I'm able to have my pedometer connected to the Internet of Things. It's not me, it's my pedometer that's saying how much I'm walking. But it has a lot to do with kind of surveillance.
Yes, I mean, basically it sounds like everything is going to have some sort of chip sensor device that is connected to the internet, so that basically everything is monitored on, I guess, a global basis. Dave, is that your understanding of what we're talking about here when we say the Internet of Things?
It's going to be more and more, but I see it's 11:29 and time to give out the phone number again.
Okay, you are listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, New York City. The phone number for call-in, 212-650-6903. Please give us a call and join the conversation.
Yeah. The Internet of Things is going to do a whole lot of stuff that we haven't imagined yet. Just as I go back to the first personal computers, and we never imagined Facebook or YouTube. We never imagined that the most important use of the computer was going to be to communicate with other folks. We thought it was going to be used to compute things.
Right.
And to play games. And many other things. So that basically the Internet of Things is saying everything's got a little computer and a little connection. What can we do that's interesting? There's every reason to think. Well, let me give you an example that is starting to happen. The medical people are really loving this. My stepmother, this is about 15, 20 years ago, Eleanor Burstein, was in her 60s at that point, and if she didn't have a lot of luck and a good 911 connection, she would have died several years earlier than she did. What was happening was she was feeling very faint as she was going to sleep. She called up my brother, who's an EMT, and he said, "Something's the matter, I'm getting an ambulance to you there." And it turned out she had been taking so much for her arthritis that she was having a bleeding problem from her stomach. If she hadn't called my brother, and he hadn't got an ambulance there because 911 was working well, she wouldn't have woken up the next morning. There's every reason that Fitbit could be monitoring my blood sugar, and if something was going wrong with my blood sugar, send an emergency alert out automatically. Actually in the laboratory have the sensors that can sit in a ring on your finger and see what your blood sugar is.
Wow, so you're not necessarily talking about an implant, you're talking about something that we
You just wear.
Yeah.
I have a friend who has sleep apnea, and one of his deep frustrations, he's getting a doctorate in CS in Texas, is he got the sleep apnea machine, and he knows it's reporting his data online to his doctor, but he can't get the data, and he wants it. It's of his body,
right.
But he's actually going to go into conversation with the company that makes the CPAP machine to see if he can keep track of his own blood oxygenation level, amount of sleep, and a few other things that the machine itself is keeping track of.
So it's reporting remotely to the doctor, but it's not reporting to the actual client who's
Correct.
right there. Well,
And that's one of the reasons I'm delighted to have met Lena and to be working with her on this show, because she's absolutely on target in saying, us geeks can come up with great technology, but we have to think about what it does to real people in the real world.
Well, the big question I have is where is security and privacy when everything and everybody is networked?
Well, Lena, when you go to Berlin, are there people likely to be at that conference who could get into your Fitbit and figure out what you were doing?
Well, my Fitbit doesn't have a GPS, but I would say if they could get into my phone and the Fitbit, absolutely. I have a particularly dumb model of pedometer, and it's somewhat on purpose. Yes, if I had a different model of Fitbit, I could absolutely walk into a hackers conference and simply by not protecting the wireless communication between my phone and that device, have people telling me where I had come from most recently. For as long as the memory on the Fitbit keeps track, they could get all of it in a single dump. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. You bring up just a side issue that I just wanted to highlight. All of what we're talking about, the Internet of Things, is enabled by underlying technology that I think the biggest driver of which is wireless technology. Wireless technology is what allows all these things to be seamlessly interconnected without wires.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Although some of them can be wired, like refrigerators that can detect if when you put the milk in it, mm-hmm. and then tell you that your milk has gone bad based off of the date on the thing. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting use case, but I'm concerned. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Dave, what do you think about the privacy issues and concerns as it relates to the Internet of Things?
Yeah, let me give you an opinion from somebody who's a bigger expert than I am. Vince Cerf, who did TCP/IP with Bob Kahn way back when, and has been in the middle of everything ever since, was being asked, what does he think about the government proposal to put a backdoor in every system so the government, with a warrant, completely legally, can go after the folks the judge has said is bad guys. And he said, whether that would be a good idea or not, he'll leave to the philosophers. But it can't work. Because if he designed a system that was good enough that could be broken into by the government when they had a perfectly legal warrant and every right, the bad guys are also going to find a way to get in. Mm-hmm. That there's enough bugs that we have. We haven't solved the problem with computer bugs. So there are enough bugs that almost everything could be cracked. And the last thing in the world we want to do is introduce another bug as a way for the government to get in, because it's not going to stay secure. Mm-hmm. And I trust his opinion on this more than I'd ever trust mine. Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the big concerns that I have, in addition to the privacy concern, which, I think Lena talked about going to a conference recently. I'm going to ask her to fill us in on that, about where they just dismiss privacy.
It was a little startling. I went to the Open Society's talk by Philip N. Howard. He wrote a book called Machinimations and Manipulations: Bots, Big Data, and the Internet of Things was the name of the event. And he wrote Pax Technica, how the Internet of Things may set us free or lock us up. And he, in the beginning of his talk, kind of dismissed privacy as gone. Like, he completely dismissed privacy as gone, and that our only choices from here on out, now that privacy is gone, is who gets our data and how. And the notion of how people are opting in or opting out, and how we should be demanding companies share that data in a political way, which was a very interesting take on it, because I'm inclined to agree that the notion of privacy in a lot of different formulations it's over. Like, we've already lost it. I have given the vast majority of my communications, my time schedules, and lots of other things specifically to Google. Though there's a number of other places who have access to similar things about me: Facebook, Twitter, and my phone company.
And the National Security Agency, which, if necessary, will hack Google in order to get your information from them. And Google is fighting back as hard as they can, but sometimes the NSA gets the stuff that Google is trying to protect.
I'm not convinced that they are fighting as hard as they can, but I think this is an issue where we could agree to disagree. Google is not 100% on their protection of communications. If they were, they would be implementing encryption options inside of Gmail, but they won't do that because then they would lose the ability to advertise inside of it.
Actually,
ooh, are they about to
Google
give
might
us?
surprise you on that kind of thing. I know some folks in Google who are working very hard because Google is an international company now. And all the people in England and Nigeria hate the idea that the NSA is watching them. So we saw China cut off Cisco from literally billions of dollars of contracts because they knew Cisco was cooperating. So Facebook is totally cooperating, not just with the U.S. government, but with the Chinese government to surveil. Microsoft is definitely cooperating with the Chinese. Google is trying to be different because they think, I'm not saying because they're more or less moral, they think their customers around the world hate the fact that they cooperate with the U.S. government, and they actually are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into security that is not designed to protect about any hacker less sophisticated than the U.S. government.
So it sounds to
Doesn't
me
mean they're perfect.
It sounds
And
to
there's
me
lots
that
of things. Yeah.
I'm sorry, David. It just sounds to me as though there are a number of potential entities out there that are going to know about us, have a vast amount of information on us, and could potentially do us harm, whether that be through some security action or through some commercial action, if you will. And that includes government, that includes corporations, and that includes hackers who may go in for some other reasons and pilfer information about us. So that's a vast amount of insecurity in today's world, as I see it.
I agree.
And the flip side of the Internet of Things and all this connectivity, not to downplay security or privacy because that's huge, but the flip side that I see is the incredible dependence that society is developing, will further develop on this networking, on this technology. What happens when there's a virus? What happens when there's a breakdown in connectivity? Will our fundamental systems of communication, of commerce, of transportation?
I'm just imagining someone doing a DDoS attack on my refrigerator so all my food goes bad. Like, just because if swatting is a thing, which is a horrifying activity where people will call the authorities from a number that looks like it's in your house.
I just started getting calls like that from my own phone number at home.
Yeah, so there's some really weird stuff, but the swatting is when they do it and then they call the authorities to have them come in and they say something very violent is going on and then folks show up in armor, and it's called swatting. It's a horrible thing that happens. But if that is a prank that people are pulling, and they consider it a prank, and it's very dangerous.
Just for fun.
Yeah, but then they're getting years in jail for it because it's incredibly bad. But if that's a prank, if my refrigerator's online, I'm definitely going to end up having someone just attack my refrigerator or hold my refrigerator ransom, because ransomware is another form of technology that's started to become more and more prevalent online, where they will take your computer hostage and say, you need to give us money before we'll give you access to your data.
But what happens if there's a mass attack where everybody is online, everybody is now dependent on this network, and there's a mass attack of the network? What happens?
I mean, I would say that argument is, you can make that argument about right now. You don't have to wait till the Internet of Things happens. We had
Katrina and we had 9/11, and that showed us what can happen and how bad it could get. So as when Stu's saying, the more dependent we are, the more vulnerable we are. One day there's going to be another Katrina. One day there's going to be another blackout. Things are going to happen. Roll-ups happen.
And we're going to be so much more dependent on the technology at that point. That's the part of the vulnerability that I see, is that not just, you can't make phone calls, you can't just drive your car. it's going to hit us a lot harder and a lot closer to home.
And I'm surprised we haven't seen the case where we could identify people dying because of this particular one. For a generation, we've been able to count on the phones working in almost any weather condition short of Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
They used to hook up to the central office. They had the most secure power system in the world, which failed in Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, we'd have 26 inches of snow in New York, and you could pick up the phone and call for an ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
The electricity might be out.
Yeah, the street might not be shoveled. It might not be able to get to you, but the call will go through.
The call will go through. Now, when we go to Verizon Fios, it's not on copper. It's on fiber. So there's no power. So if the electricity goes out, which happens a lot in many places, your phone absolutely goes out too.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Fios lines, some people keep the battery running, but most people never replace it. So after 4 or 5 years, there's no battery backup in that. So the next time there's a blackout, there will be a lot of people who can't communicate. And some of them are going to die because of it. Of course, we're going to save even more lives because everybody has a wireless phone, and that's going to connect in most cases anyway.
As long as the battery is charged.
As long as the battery is charged at the cell tower you connect to.
Yes, and your handheld, and your unit, your device.
And your unit.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been an ongoing battle between the FCC, which since Katrina has been saying 4 hours battery at the cell site is not enough. You have to keep going longer than that because sometimes the electricity is out for more than 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And the phone companies who are saying, that's ridiculous, it's too expensive, we're not going to do it. And literally, the phone companies have been tying up the government in court because they don't want to put bigger batteries into all the cell sites for the once-in-10-year emergency where it would be really needed. But that once-in-10-year emergency can kill 6,000 people.
Yeah, that could cost a lot of lives. I remember a recent blackout. I'm not sure of the year, but here in the New York metro area, within the last 5-10 years or so, and we were out of power for so long that the 72-hour batteries in the central offices of the landlines went out. And we lost landline service over copper because 72 hours of battery life was not enough in a real severe crisis. So 4 hours, that's kind of ridiculous.
These are real issues that the people in the industry all know about, but without political pressure, are not going to be solved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And again, I guess it's an esoteric-sounding type of issue, and one that is hard to drum up any real support or clamor for.
But it is something that should be fought for, absolutely.
And until there's a crisis, then, okay, why'd this happen?
Eleanor Bernstein would have died that night if her telephone didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
She went on to have another half dozen years of interesting life.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the stakes in some of the things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that I'm not still kind of excited about the Internet of Things. I mean, I am someone who is extremely techy. I love having toys to play with. I love being connected to the internet. It makes me feel like I'm connected to other people, and I like people. Although New York certainly does have a lot of them. So
next you're going to start talking to people in Paris and not think about the cost of the phone call.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I somewhat do that now because I use technologies like web video RT. I mean,
you're talking to me in Paris right now,
right? But I'm not concerned because you called me.
But I wasn't concerned because I'm in on Skype.
There you go.
So this forward momentum does have some great things, but we should be concerned in looking at where are the emergencies, where are the pitfalls. But frankly, I have a plant that could have lived if it knew how to tweet when it needed to be watered, but that technology hasn't quite caught on as much as it could. But I will say, when you're concerned about, a plant versus a person, these there's differences.
Well, I tell you, a very practical day-to-day application that I've thought about for a long time, just driving around New York City, is if every car were on the Internet of Things, we could have a visual display on our dashboard as to where the traffic congestions are. And in a town like New York City, it's all about the alternative routes. What is moving now? What is not moving? And if every vehicle was tagged and you could get a visual picture instantaneously of where the traffic was, that would be a tremendous... I'd pay for that.
I want them to be self-driving. I'm going to go ahead and say
I'm
fine with that.
Okay.
I want them to know of each other and to be self-driving because I think that cars are one of the most dangerous things on the planet statistically.
And I love to drive, but I agree with you.
I
agree.
think there could be special set-aside places for
you
people to
got
drive their own cars.
Off in the country where you can't hurt anyone.
Really nice, really manicured, kind of like a Golf setup, but just for your, Volkswagen Golf.
For your urban driving, particularly in a metropolis like New York City. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, no. But where self-driving things would actually are probably going to come in first is for trucks, for trucking, for freight.
Okay.
Because the humans who are driving trucks, it's so dangerous to be a truck driver. There's so many 5-hour energy drinks that are taken 3 at a time, and you still have people who aren't driving safely because it's just the demands put on freight is so serious that's where self-driving is cars and automobiles is being pushed first.
Could that be integrated with non-self-driving at the same time? I mean, could that happen?
Yeah. I mean, right now there are self-driving cars that are being tested across country. The earliest ones I've heard of were in the 90s, and that was seriously early tech because they didn't have GPS at the resolution we have it now. But you just need the intelligent enough cameras with the good enough algorithms. That's not to say that they aren't without potential for danger, but Google has self-driving cars out there. A few other people are working on it. And different places are trying to decide how do we deal with self-driving cars. But yeah, you can have people-driven cars and self-driven cars simultaneously.
Interesting.
It just has to do with how well can the self-driving car predict what's going to happen. But with machine learning, where you actually collect all of the experiences of the self-driving car are collected, the longer and more they're on the road, the better they get. That's not to say that there aren't some very serious concerns with self-driving cars. If you listen on my show on Monday night, Rose Regina will really go off on the topic of how concerning self-driving cars. I'm much more on the other side of the fence where I like them. Is
there any society or country where you know that it's more prevalent than over here?
Most of the research has been going on here, but there is some in the UK that I know of, but I'm not sure. I think it's a little more popular in the UK that it's being worked on, but I'm not positive. What about in Paris? Seen any self-driving cars?
I haven't seen any in Paris, but BMW is among the world leaders in research. But you're a lot younger than me, so it's highly likely that in your lifetime you will have regular self-driving cars.
I suspect it'll be in your lifetime as well. I think it will be.
There's a good chance on it, but those Google cars have already had 4 accidents. And they don't drive except on a very limited pre-programmed course. They can't drive in San Francisco or Manhattan. It's a while before all the bugs are out.
One of the amazing things to watch was the differences in the reporting on those 4 accidents. The people who were pointing out, well, this is how many hours it was, the number of the accidents that were, they were like, well, we don't know if it was actually the self-driving car or if it was the person who took over driving from the self-driving car, because that's part of it, is that you can turn off the self-driving part and just drive.
And one of those 4 accidents was somebody else rear-ending them.
Yeah, so there's always these
some
different.
Nuance in there.
Well, it's really neat to watch the people who are very concerned about this, who put out, they're trying to hide these accidents from us, and I'm like, well, then how do we get the information?
Right.
But the answer is public record, because anything that goes into traffic court becomes part of the public record. That it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's There's still a whole lot between where we are today and getting around Manhattan. It may happen in my lifetime. It will happen in yours.
Before we finish up, it is winding up. We've got 5 minutes to go. I wanted to get your guys' comments on the recent action in Congress regarding the Patriot Act and Section 215 being removed out of the act. What do you guys think about that?
Well,
I'm saying ladies first. So
all
Luna,
right.
go ahead.
I'm glad, though it's not far enough, because it can be reenacted at Congress's discretion. So it's not as though the legislation is being taken away. It's just not being enacted right now. So it's good. I don't think that's one I'd argue against, but it's not enough for me.
Dave?
Ed Snowden put his life on the line, getting the information out that made this possible.
Yeah, that's quite an insight. Yes, it's incredible that he did that. I don't know that he's getting the proper recognition for that.
He was very aware that his life was in danger. It may still be, but probably isn't. Certainly he could be locked up for the rest of his life if he gets anywhere near somebody American who could arrest him. That's a pretty big thing. I had no idea how intense it was, and I'm in the business, and I read the civil liberties stuff. In fact, when I go to Amazon, it gives a small donation to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which has been doing heroic work on this issue for a decade, before most of us realized it was there.
I'm going to mention how you're doing that in case any of our listeners are interested in that. It's smile.amazon.com. You can set up whatever, it's not a limited selection of charities. If you can get the number for the tax whatever, you can put in any charity to receive a small portion of everything you buy from Amazon to charity. It's
and
just
I
mentioning.
thought Lena was jumping in to tell me about how Amazon is an ugly monopoly that's taking advantage in a lot of places, which is also true. And I, in fact, try not to buy from Amazon sometimes. So there are all the issues. But yes, 0.5% of what you spend on Amazon can go wherever you want it to, and that's a good thing.
Before we leave the topic of NSA, towards the end of one of the articles I was reading, they said, oh, by the way, even though we are no longer collecting, we the government are no longer collecting this information. Well, one, the phone companies still have it, so it's still there. And two, we the government still have the capability to collect and read anyone's email. And how come no one's talking about that? That's astounding to me.
Which is why I say folks like the EFF have been doing remarkable work, because they have been talking about it way before somebody like me understood how intense it was.
So, when is our next show?
Our next show is going to be the second Wednesday in July, July 8th, 5 p.m.
Oh, I'll be back then.
Excellent.
The first Wednesday I was going to have to call in.
Well, we decided to skip the first Wednesday because yours truly is going to be out celebrating his birthday. So my apologies to our listeners out there who are looking forward to the first Wednesday in July. It's going to be the second Wednesday in July.
It's just going to build up the anticipation.
There
You've got another week to wait. It'll be wonderful.
There you go. So you'll be back from Paris, huh, Dave?
Well, I had a couple of jobs over here. So it's delightful. And Jenny's with me. And I can call and spend an hour on the phone calling in, and you can hear me just fine. And it's on Skype and costs almost nothing.
Excellent.
That is technology moving forward in a good way.
Absolutely. We'll be sure and say hello to Jenny and thank her for allowing you to share an hour of your time with us, our folks here back in New York.
I'm going to log off and let you do the sign-off. Good night, guys.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. That was Dave Burstein calling live from Paris.
Yes, and we will talk more tech and culture July 8th, the second Wednesday of next month. Same time, 5 to 6.
Look forward to it. You've been listening to Community and Technology on WHCR FM 90.3. Stay tuned for Nutmeg in the Middle with Kadir. Nutmeg Jazz in the Middle with Kadir. Okay.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Did you just look down at your phone? You did it again, didn't you? You know, you're flying down the road in a 3-ton hunk of steel, and a text takes your eyes off the road for an average of 5 seconds. At 55 miles per hour, that's long enough.
Identity theft is one of the fastest growing crimes in the United States. Every year, 15 million residents in the United States have their identities stolen. Sometimes there is no way to prevent identity theft, but there are some precautions you can take. Number 1, never share personal information like your social security number with anyone. Number 2, pay attention to your surroundings and your belongings. Number 3,